Please welcome my colleague and friend, Mr. James Bach.
Thank you. Okay. Ready to go. My life is like a test, a very extreme sort of test. And why do we run extreme tests? This is something that started occurring to me as I was getting so nervous, ready to come up here. Why do we run extreme tests? Because, users don't use the product in anything like the extreme ways that we will use the product as testers. So someone who doesn't understand testing might come to you and say, "Tester, why are you doing these extreme things? Why are you opening so many files at once? Why are you giving it such large files? It's so unusual for a user to do that." And of course, I hope you say back to them, we run extreme tests because of what that teaches us about the product, even under normal circumstances. We run extreme tests because even when you have a normal population of usage, there are probabilities that extreme things could happen here and there. But mainly, I think it's what we learn about normal usage, which is why I do extreme things. I can't test everything, you see. So if I test in an especially challenging situation, I can gain better confidence that the product will function effectively and happily, even under normal circumstances. Well, I stand before you as a human test. I was just reading this disturbing survey about software testing certification. I really shouldn't read stuff like this before I come up because I begin to seethe with indignation about this. I have to tell you, I am not certified by the ISTQB, CSTE, or anything else. I am peer certified. I'm probably, it's possible that there's a tester in the world who is higher paid than I am. It's possible. I have not heard of such a person. I once made $35,000 a week for 12 weeks on one project. I've never heard of a tester being paid more than that. My only regret is I probably will never be paid that much ever again. It was a very special circumstance. It was the Microsoft antitrust lawsuit, and I was providing key evidence in that trial, and so wow, that was great. It was like being Michael Jackson just for a little bit. But I'm brought in as a consultant on very difficult situations. A few months ago, I was called by a client, and I had to go to the airport from where I was and get on a plane and fly to LA to do 1 day of testing for a critical project and then fly back home again. All I had was that 1 day. That's all I had time for. I was going to go to Europe a couple days after that, so I didn't even have time to take my son home. I was with my son. I couldn't take him home. They had to get him a plane ticket too. It was like being a secret agent. It's like, "We need you, 007. There's a spot of bother down south ways. Okay, I'm on it. Send the invisible jet." I had a client send a limousine for me once and take me to Woodbridge, Virginia, and I had to help them because they're a company with 4 people in it, and their only client, which was Intel, was threatening to throw away a multi-million-dollar deal with them because they had no QA process. So they heard that I could help them. So they sent a limo for me and had me come down, and I crafted a document which intimidated the people at Intel just enough to give these guys the room to maneuver that they needed until they could hire a test team and start fixing the problem that they had, which was they had no QA process, and they were really in a lot of trouble because of that. So that's exciting. That's exciting for me. But I'm an extreme case. How did I get to be a sort of person that anyone would know about so that they would know to email me to, say, have me speak in Switzerland, the first time I've ever been to Switzerland. I came here from London, where I was teaching. I'm going to Stockholm after this, then Bucharest, then the Netherlands, then Florida, then a few other places in the U.S. Then I go to Australia and New Zealand. Then I go to Singapore and India, Estonia, Finland. That's all this year. I'm completely booked for a year in advance. Well, how does that happen? I think that by looking at my rather extreme case, you can find some lessons that apply to you. And here's why this matters. This is a worldwide industry, obviously. You, whether you know it or not, are in competition with people in China, in Pakistan, in India, in New Zealand, in Tonga, anywhere. You know, there's hasn't been much of an industrial infrastructure in Eastern Europe, but they're starting to figure out that internet is pretty inexpensive and computers aren't that expensive, and you could pretty much be in a grass hut or an old communist building, and you can start up a testing company, and the people around you will not be very expensive, and a lot of them are very smart. So, here's the problem. If you think of testing in such a way that you make testing into a mechanical, factory-like process, you are creating a situation where it's easy for people who cost a fifth, a tenth of what you cost to do exactly the job that you say you're doing, which is very attractive to people who don't know anything about testing. They think, why do we have you then? You spent years convincing us that we should script everything so that it can move from tester to tester so easily. You spent years convincing us managers who know nothing about testing that interchangeability of components is a very important thing. We're convinced, and we just found that there's a testing company in India that we'd like to outsource all your stuff to, and then we'll say goodbye to you. This happened to my brother when he worked at LexisNexis, and they just outsourced his team right from under him. No one ever talked to him about it. They had no idea what they were throwing away. But he ended up turning that Indian testing team into a bunch of educated super testers because he personally trained each one. The thing that bothers me about that is I bet his manager doesn't think, well, it's a good thing we had John Bach working for us to make this work. Instead, they probably think, see, you can outsource to India and everything will be great. There's no problems at all. American testers aren't needed. Sophisticated testers who study their art like a samurai studying the art of peeling an orange with a katana blade while it's in the air, all that kind of thing. We don't need that. We just need a mob with some pitchforks that can scream loudly, and you get the same effect. We don't need highly trained tester soldiers. So this is why what I'm about to say to you actually matters. If you want job security in this industry, you need to understand a few things. You need to understand that competing with 110,000 people, apparently that's how many people have been ISTQB certified, competing with 110,000 people who are aggressively trying to be as much like each other as possible is maybe a poor strategy. Maybe a better strategy would be to develop yourself into a unique testing resource. This is what I have done. I agree, I have done it in an extreme way. You don't have to be, maybe you don't want to be, anywhere near as extreme as I am. But I can tell you one thing about Swiss testers. There is only one tester in all of Switzerland that anyone in my circle of intensively communicating, mostly American testers, has ever heard of, and that's Larry. One person. There's room for more. I'm telling you, there's room for more. Meanwhile, I can tell you that there's a community of vibrant testing thinkers in Sweden. There's about 20 of them that are known around the world, including in amongst my community of context-driven testing people in the United States. And those people are cited in testing conferences around the world just as I am. We have public international reputations. And all they had to do was study their craft real hard, try real hard, talk to each other about it. You need to have a few ideas. You need to practice. You need to have a work ethic that says, I want to be excellent at testing, not just kind of okay, not just okay so that a company won't throw away my resume. Well, okay, so let me tell you, I got to tell you a little bit about myself. I dropped out of high school when I was 16 in 1982. I was creating a lot of trouble in high school. I had decided when I was 12 that homework violates the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which prohibits slavery. And I cited that to my teachers. They said it didn't apply to children. I go, I'm a U.S. citizen. There's nothing here that says that it doesn't apply to children. I am a U.S. citizen. It says neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall be allowed in the United States without due process. And I don't recall being convicted of anything. So they didn't think that was true, and I went on this sort of very mild, I guess they would call it terrorism campaign. I intentionally failed tests, which drove them nuts. It's kind of like hitting a beehive with a bat when you intentionally fail tests that your teachers know that you could have passed easily. Oh, they get graded down. It's terrible. So I was in this terrible battle. I was terribly depressed about it. I was morose about this whole situation, but I had to stand up for myself, and it was a big part of becoming a person for me to define myself in some way, and I ended up defining myself against the school system. And my father finally said, why don't you just quit school? You're just causing a lot of trouble. And I said, I'm allowed to? He said, sure, yeah, whatever. Years later, he said that he doesn't remember telling me that was... He has no idea what I'm talking about, but I remember him saying that, and that as soon as he said that, I was gone. I was out of there. And my older brother, got me a job at a computer store where I was selling computers. In 6 months, I sold 0 computers, and I broke 1. So I was -1 on that. I was the Iron Man of not selling a computer, and it had something to do with the fact that I didn't talk to people when they came in. I was very very shy. I just wanted to write software. But one day someone came in and said, do you know anyone who can program? And I said, sure, I program. And I showed him a program that I wrote in assembly language of all these little dots flying around the screen. And he said, you're hired. And he paid me 3 times what I was making in the computer store, which was still, I discovered, really cheap. I was like migrant farm labor for this guy. And he made all kinds of money on me. But it was great because it was just what I needed. And I began to learn to be a professional programmer because he showed me what I needed to do and the quality standard I needed to live up to. A few years later, I was hired by Apple Computer as the youngest manager in the R&D group at Apple. I'm not absolutely sure I was the youngest. I never met anyone younger than me. I got used to being the youngest person in any meeting. So I was 20 years old, and I was hired as a test manager, having not had any test management experience or testing experience at all. But it's great that this industry is so incompetent that it will hire people who are completely unqualified. It's great opportunities for people like me. I think the guy who hired me wanted to mentor somebody. And he saw me as a protege that he could work with, and that's exactly what I needed. And later, he's no longer in the computing industry. Chris Brown of Apple Computer is now a a therapist. That's what he does for a living. And I can understand that. It makes sense. He loved management because he loved developing people, and I was a hot prospect for him, and it was wonderful. I learned so much at Apple Computer. I decided when I joined Apple that there were 400 people doing testing in the building I was in Apple Computer. All the testers were in one building in downtown Cupertino, and I had to get up to speed as fast as I could. And a lot of these people were college hires and college and master's degrees and a couple of PhDs here and there. Although the guy who hired me said, never hire a PhD because they don't know anything about practical stuff. Now, I've since worked with people with PhDs, and I was mostly right. But there's sometimes you have someone with a PhD who is an amazing practical mind. So I know I don't have any problem. Actually, I kind of like having people with PhDs because they're different from me, and I learned that hiring people different from me makes me more powerful. So I want people who are multilingual. I am super monolingual. Unless you count Perl and C++ as languages, I'm trying to be very deeply monolingual. I study vocabulary words that other Americans don't know so that I can be extra single-lingual. I feel bad about that, but I was born in an imperial land, and in the imperial land, everyone wants to learn your language rather than the other way around. So I was hired at Apple. Now, I want you to notice something. Apple Computer had a requirement. The requirement was that someone hired into the position that I had to have a computer science degree. So what did they do? They completely ignored that requirement, and they hired me anyway. That's why this stuff about you have to be certified or you won't get a job is such nonsense. That's just an excuse for them not to hire you because they don't like you. They need an excuse that doesn't sound like I don't like you. So they'll go, oh, well, you didn't put the right word on your resume, so I can't hire you. Sorry. It's not because I don't like you. Don't get me wrong. My hands are tied. I find that when I go into a situation, people make exceptions. Why do they make exceptions for me? Because I'm really, really good at what I do. Well, wait, that's not really the reason. It's because they think I'm really, really good at what I do. I actually may not be very good at what I do. I work very hard, I promise you. I work very hard to be good at what I do, but inside, I know that no one can know, and not even I can know, if I'm succeeding. All I can do is hang out with the most challenging minds that I can find, like Ilari, for instance. Very challenging mind. He didn't tell you, but the problem that I gave him is nicknamed the impossible problem, and it's a very difficult problem to solve. And the next morning, he showed me all his spreadsheets where he'd worked out all the prime factors of everything and came to the answer in a method that was completely different than what I did. I wrote a program that solved it for me, so I didn't go through the mental gymnastics that he had to do. I like to hang out with people like that because those people make me better. They make me smarter, and I need to be sharp. Plus, I got to keep an eye on him because Ilari's actually my competition. You got to keep an eye on your competitors. That's the people I have to worry about, is the people who might invent something new that will change everything. So they had this requirement. The requirement is you got to have a computer science degree. The hiring manager says, whatever, you have the equivalent, which is I like you, and you're hired. Now, you might still be concerned about that, so let me tell you this too. They hired me as a contractor, and the requirements for contractors were lower than the contractors for full-time employees. I didn't care. 9 months later, I was made into a full-time employee, and the basis of that was, look, he's been a contractor for 9 months. He's done great work. We need to get this guy on full-time so we don't have to pay him an hourly wage. It'll be cheaper for us. Bring him on, make him a franchise player. So if you come from an unusual background and you're worried, oh no, how can I compete? The way you compete is by featuring your unusual background, whatever it is. I'm a musician, that shall make me a better tester. I'm an accountant, that will make me a better tester. I can make chainmail in my spare time, that will make me a better tester. I actually heard when I went to BioWare, a video game company, they hired a tester there because he put in front of them an example of chainmail that he had made in his spare time, and they were so impressed by that they thought, that's the kind of go-getter that we need. Someone who thinks about defense as well as offense, someone who is, hasn't completely forgotten about the threat of arrows. So my case is extreme, but I hope what you do not do is dismiss this and say, well, James is some kind of special super genius. That's what people keep doing. It drives me nuts. I have to go into it. It's actually humiliating in a way because it means that I have to list all the ways that I am not very smart to convince them that I'm not a super genius who is an exception to all the rules. I'm not an exception to the rule. The door is open for all of you. So let me explain some of this. Okay, you've got to develop yourself. If you want job security in this craft, if you want to make it so if one place doesn't hire you, someone else will. If you want to make it so that you can control who you work for and the quality of your work environment, so that if you find yourself working for someone who demands that you do something really silly, like count test cases, which is one of the dumbest ideas in our industry, you can say, no, I'm not going to do that. And if they say, you better do it or you're fired, you go, okay, see you later. I'm going to go work for someone who's not insane, someone who deserves my services. If you want to do that, you've got to develop yourself into an excellent tester. This is a self-development process. There is no organization out there that can make you an excellent tester. The ISTQB doesn't do it. If you have anyone here who's ISTQB certified, you know what I'm talking about. You know how easy that test was to pass. I've heard from people who just they look at the syllabus for a few minutes and then they go take the test and they pass it and then they feel dirty afterwards. And I think we need a higher standard in this community. So you've got to develop yourself. You've got to get serious. Okay? And all these things are involved in that. Speaking, writing, project experiences. Now this is part of, all these things are part of self-development, and all these things are also part of earning your reputation, which must go hand in hand. It's not good enough to become good enough as a tester because you also have to become known as being good enough. That's the reputation part. And I know there's a lot of people who are kind of quiet and shy, and you don't, especially in Europe, you don't like to tout your own horn. You don't like to sell yourself. And I understand that. Just remember that there are other people out there who will cost a lot less than you. You've got to find some way to make your employer go, I want her. She's got to stay. All those other people can go. She's special. She has special, unique skills that we need. And hence the concept of Buccaneer-Scholar. Let me explain this a little bit. I wrote a book called Secrets of a Buccaneer-Scholar. I've got it around here somewhere. Oh, here it is. This is a book. It's a tiny little book. You know, this took me 26 years to write. I started writing it when my father, who's a best-selling author himself, my father's belief about success in life is, why don't you just write a best-selling book? What's all this stuff about working for a living? Like, I don't. Why should you? So that might start to explain a few things about, I am very much influenced by my father in my life. He wrote a book called Jonathan Livingston Seagull, which in 1970 started selling like crazy. It sold 40 million books. He's a very interesting kind of thinker, and he's been like a Cheshire cat in my life. It just shows up with a smile and says a few things and then disappears again. It's kind of how he is. And so he told me when I was 17, you should write a book about education. That's what you should do. And I started trying to write the book, which was initially called School Kills, and then I abandoned that title a little bit later. My dad said, that's a perfect title. Go for it. That'll be great. And if you could just get it written really quickly, every year since then, he said, you should get that book done. You should get that book done. In 1990, I tried to write it again. In 1995, I tried to write it again. In 2005, I tried to write it again. Finally, in 2008, I got it done, and it was because my father finally said, I will hire you to finish your book. And he became my single client for 6 months so I could take 6 months off and write the book. Because I'm not a kind of guy who can do writing and do anything else. I need to have complete nothing to do if I'm going to get anything done and write it. Writing is very hard for me. A lot of people write more easily. For me, it's a major thing. So I thank my father for giving me the opportunity to finally finish the book. And it was basically written for him and presented to him. And then it got published too. So that was great. Now, this book develops a metaphor of buccaneering. By the way, Ilari, I'm going to need you to tell me when I have 15 minutes left because I'm completely oblivious. So let me know, wave your arm around or something like that, okay? Let's see. Okay, so the book is organized around the metaphor of a buccaneer and a buccaneering culture. I read widely. I read widely because my first manager at Apple Computer told me to. He said, James, don't just read books about testing. You got to read books outside of our field and apply those ideas to testing. And I said, yes, sir. And I started spending substantial work time at Apple Computer reading about all kinds of things, history, ergonomics. I didn't really check with my manager after that. I just assumed he meant that I should spend half my day every day in a coffee shop across the street called the Donut Wheel, studying research papers of different kinds. I read a research paper once called Optimum Handle Height for Push-Pull Type Dryland Weeders. And I just had to wonder, what happened to the guy who wrote that when they invented adjustable handles? That's a terrible, tragic story, I bet. His whole career spent figuring out how long to make the handle, and then people just learned to adjust it. That's, him and the buggy whip people, big trouble. So I read lots of stuff, and I started getting into this idea that if I learn in lots of different areas, then I might stumble on a crucial idea that I will recognize that no one else will, and it began to be like a treasure hunt, just like buccaneers finding the treasure. And I stumbled into a theory of history that this crazy guy named Buckminster Fuller had, where he thought that actually pirates affected history and pirates ruled the world for a period of time. And I think he's completely wrong about that, but it got me thinking about what pirates are, what buccaneers are. And I started studying the history of buccaneering, and I learned that the buccaneers were not just pirates. They were a free society that lived in the Caribbean. And they saw themselves as a free society, and they were completely apart from any of the nation states. And the nation states worked with the buccaneers, sometimes hired them as mercenaries. And I realized that the attitude that the buccaneers had and their sense of their own freedom and their boldness and the fact that they were multi-talented people who developed their reputation and a pirate ship is not run by a pirate captain. I didn't know that. Buccaneer ships are run democratically. They elect their captain, and they can unelect the captain. And pirate cruises are a matter of consensus. Now, that same kind of attitude, actually, they have, yes, 15 minutes? Okay. That same kind of attitude they have in Sweden, actually, with the Vikings up there, which is one reason my stuff's really popular in Sweden. So this whole metaphor of buccaneering caught my imagination, and I realized that that's how I get through life. And maybe if more people did a bit of that, then they would be able to stand out in a positive way, accomplish things that they thought that they couldn't accomplish otherwise. I'm here to tell you that without any formal education, I successfully compete with people of any educational background. I have no trouble. I've sat on a merit review committee for the National Science Foundation, which was everyone else was a PhD on that committee, and I helped decide where research funds should go to for people researching testing. And they invited me to that because I'm well known. Of course, some of the other people on the panel were really insulted that some kid who has no PhD was allowed to sit amongst them. But that's just what a Buccaneer would do. I take no prisoners. So it's a metaphor. It's a metaphor that fits this economy where you can no longer accept, you can no longer just assume that your company's going to take care of you. Buccaneers take care of themselves. That doesn't mean that we're all alone. We work with teams of other people. I've got friends. I create networks of helpers who will help me, just like on a pirate ship. So this is my basic idea: living free, hunting ideas, and winning my reputation, winning my credibility. And there's a number of different methods that I talk about in my book that I use routinely to constantly be learning. I'm constantly educating myself. I was so happy to visit the Cambridge Press bookstore in Cambridge, England the other day, one of the best bookstores I've ever been in. I got 21 books, had them shipped home, and very excited. All these are very strange books. A book on denotational semantics. I just love saying the title. Denotational semantics. I got a book the other day called Experimental and Quasi-Experimental Designs for Generalized Causal Inference. I just want the title of the book to be showing as I walk by. That alone intimidates people in just a little way, just a little subtle intimidation. Okay. I have to admit, I still feel self-conscious about this, but I recently got new glasses, and these are the thickest frames I could get because I figure it sends a message that's getting you unconsciously. Unconsciously, you're thinking, he must be smart. He's got very thick glasses, right? I'm going to use semiotics on you, the science of signs and symbols. I operate as a dilettante, as a shallow learner. I know a little bit about lots and lots and lots of things, and I find as a tester that this allows me to learn quickly about the products I need to learn about. But I can't go into a whole lot of details about that. I want to mention one thing here. Let's say the principle of alternation. I use the principle of alternation as a learning method in my work all the time. The principle of alternation, which I bet you know about too, but you probably don't call it that. It's the principle of doing complementary activities in a cyclic way, such as you play with the product for a while, then you go and read about the product for a while. And then you go back to play with the product, and then you go back to read about it. And that's not just aimless wandering. That's actually a very important thing. Each activity infuses the other complementary activity. If I tried to just read a spec, I would learn very little from it compared to reading, playing, reading, playing, reading, playing. And I've done this with patents, which are the hardest kinds of specs for me to read, is patents. Patents are written in such an outrageous way. And I was on a patent infringement lawsuit, which my side won. It could have had to do with the fact that the facts were on our side, but also it could be just because I'm brilliant. It could be either one. And I had to memorize 3 patents, practically memorize them, and it took me weeks to do. But I kept going back and forth between reading the patent, playing with the technology, reading the patent, playing with the technology, and they both reinforced each other. This is also more commonly in the testing business known as exploratory testing. Exploratory testing is combining the complementary activities of test design with test execution. And it makes both more powerful than if you try to do all your test design once in the beginning and get it right, and then to do all your test execution. It's better to alternate back and forth rather rapidly. That's one of the techniques that I use. I do lots of other things too. I obsess about things for a while and then let them leave my mind, just forget them. I don't worry about them because I've learned that they come back to my mind at just the right moment. So often something that I learned years ago and forgot that I learned about will pop into my head just when I need it. There's lots of different techniques that I use, and what I'm trying to achieve is expertise. Here's my vision of expertise. Since expertise is situated in three ways at least: socially, people have to see me as an expert; psychologically, I have to feel like I want to be an expert; and technically, I actually need to understand enough about technology to apply my expertise as a tester. This is my vision. This is my personal credo of being a tester, and I want to share it with you. I can test anything under any conditions in any time frame. That's it. I go through there's a little more to it. There's a little more to it. I have some fine print I must share with you. I can test anything under any conditions in any time frame relative to my standing in the local community and how hard I try and my technical insight. And there's a little bit more, such that I deliver useful results in a usable form. I perform at least as well as any other expert would. Wake me up at 3 a.m. and say, test a nuclear power plant in 5 minutes. I bet I would do as well as anyone else would do in that situation who is similarly situated. It's a vision that takes different forms in different situations. But it's an attitude. And it's an attitude that I can work on and develop the deep competence that comes behind that attitude. So it begins with an attitude. It begins with this feeling like, I bet I can learn that. And that's the Buccaneer attitude. The Buccaneer attitude is whatever anyone else knows, I can learn it. I used to deal with another high school dropout that I'd hired at Apple Computer, and I hired him because he had this long list of accomplishments. And he told me once that he got himself a job as a project manager at an artificial intelligence company because he just taught himself all this stuff. And he said that he got to work with these amazing, brilliant people who were artificial intelligence researchers, and they all worked for him. And he said that when you hang around people who play the violin and do word games and routinely learn complex things, you start thinking you can do that too. And it kind of rubs off on you. And you kind of become someone who can do that, even if you never thought of yourself as any particular genius sort of person before. And I've taken that lesson to heart myself, and I started thinking that way about myself. So this, I think, is a reasonable thing. Relative to these things, I can test anything, and I can do it in this way. And this is the work of a career to make this be true. But that's my vision. Now I have a syllabus, and I want to share the syllabus with you. This is what testing means to me. Now, this is not anything like the ISTQB syllabus, I hope you notice. This is very different. I think this is a Renaissance, deep scientific thinking kind of idea. I study general systems theory. I recommend a book called Introduction to General Systems Theory by Jerry Weinberg, which changed my life to read this. I study epistemology, applied epistemology, and that includes the ability to study how decisions should be made rationally, and critical thinking, and formal logic. That's why I have my denotational semantics book. Lateral thinking as well. Also plausible reasoning, which is a term coined by George Polya in his book How to Solve It, which is a seminal book in the history of heuristics. Books about design of experiments. I hope you notice, if you've ever read a testing textbook, that no testing textbook actually tells you how to create a test. Oh, they give you a few little pointers and ideas, but it's books about design of experiments, which testers generally don't read, that actually tell you how to construct an experiment that other scientists will respect, that will stand up to scrutiny. And guess what? Every test you do is an experiment. So I read books on design of experiments and study the mathematics behind that. There's also something called naturalistic inquiry. A guy named Egon Guba is famous for coming up with that. I read widely about the history and philosophy of science, and that's applied epistemology. I also look into cognitive science. And there's a wonderful book out there now called Thinking Fast and Slow by a Nobel Prize laureate named Dan Kahneman. And it's a mind-blowing book with all kinds of great ideas for testers. I study heuristics, human factors, how people actually make decisions, which is irrational, by the way. That's how I know that I don't need to quantify the value of testing. People are always asking me that. How do I quantify the value of testing? Well, why do you want to quantify the value of testing? Well, my management said that's how they make decisions. Your management is pulling your leg. That's not how anybody makes decisions. You know how your manager makes decisions? He goes golfing and talks to his friend who says, you should really outsource that. It's really cheap. Okay, sure, because you're my friend and I'm listening to you and I'm not talking to anyone else. I guess that's what I'll do. That's the kind of thing that they do to make decisions. There's another guy who won a Nobel Prize, Herbert Simon, in 1978. He won the prize in economics for studying how organizations actually make decisions. And he showed how messy that process was. And Daniel Kahneman also is won the prize for showing how messy our thinking is. You need to become the master of messy thinking because that's what you got to deal with. So what I do to counteract the quantifiers is I become better at telling stories than they are. And I tell stories that motivate people. I say there were 500 medical device recalls due to software problems in the FDA medical device recall database, such as, and I list some examples. And I say each recall stopped that company from selling its product for 3 or 4 months and cost millions, potentially millions of dollars to fix the problems. Okay? And do you want that to happen to you? That turns out to be a motivating thing to say to a medical device manufacturer that is telling you, do we really need to do this testing? So I do that kind of thing, which turns out, in my experience, to be more effective than saying, there's a 39% coverage of the such and such, which they just shrug and go, whatever. That doesn't mean anything to them. So, cognitive science, these are the forms of mathematics that I find useful as a tester. I studied calculus I took a college calculus class when I was 14 because I love math. And I would love to use calculus in my career, but I've never found a way to apply calculus to testing. One day, maybe it will happen. But this is the stuff I actually apply, graph theory, set theory, that sort of thing. Now, I'm a dilettante in all these areas. I'm not an expert. But when I find a statistics problem, I'm glad that I have 15 or so statistics textbooks in my library, and I can solve it. And I'm very good at Google, and I will teach myself statistics as needed to solve. And I had to do that recently to do statistical testing of power accuracy on a medical device. And I was so happy that the company statistician at Johnson & Johnson signed off on my work. I'm like, yes, I got validation. Not that I needed it, but it feels good that someone who thinks of themselves as a professional statistician, which I am not, looked at what I did and said, this is reasonable. So yes, thank you, textbooks. Testing folklore is also important, and the ISTQB is all about testing folklore. So knowing that's useful too. Communication, rhetoric, storytelling about that. Technology is important. Software, process dynamics, self-management stuff. All of this stuff, I believe I need to learn a little bit about all this stuff. A little bit. I don't need to be a total expert in any of it, but this is the field that I believe I'm working in order to be considered an expert. A lot of books here. These are all on the materials which you have. And I don't have time to talk about this. I want to skip ahead to this last bit because I only have a couple minutes left. I'll skip ahead to, I'll talk about this. This is an example of a testing flash mob, what happened when we had a testing flash mob. In my community, we challenge each other with puzzles. And one puzzle that popped up the other day, someone found this parking fee calculator online and challenged his friends on Twitter to test it. And we all piled on, and this became a big deal among us. Because what you've got to, and I found the highest total that you could be you charged for. My brother found one that was $1 less, and I managed to get it better by $1. We figured out by looking at the source that it is theoretically possible to add $11 to this, but we've not been able to do that yet. I'll leave you with this. This is what I'll leave you with. You need to do these 4 things. You need to build your public and private in your company, but your public reputation, and that means the stories people tell about you. You need to build your friends who will vouch for you and who will make you more powerful because they want to see you succeed. Like Alari, like Marcus Gartner in Germany, who's the only German tester that I know. And 20 or so Swedish testers and testers in New Zealand, a bunch of testers who are helping me and we're helping each other. And we invite anyone who's interested in puzzles and learning to join us. It's a completely open thing. The price that you pay is you must be ready to perform. If we challenge you to a testing duel, you can't say, oh, I'm sorry, I don't do testing duels. Well, you can't be in our Buccaneering community unless you're ready to have a little rapier duel with testing. That's the price you pay. You've got to demonstrate your competence on demand. And you need a portfolio. Develop your professional portfolio so that when I Google for you, like I was doing the other day with these guys, I couldn't find any information on anything these guys thought about testing. Here's a guy who just listed a bunch of things on his resume. I interviewed these guys. I ended up hiring this guy who said nothing about testing on his resume because he was able to perform better on the practical puzzles that I gave him than these other guys who could just talk about these buzzwords. I don't think the buzzword approach helps you compete. But when you can be challenged to a testing duel and acquit yourself well, stories will begin to be told about you, which spread, and they create an identity, a brand for yourself, and that makes you either impossible to outsource, or it means that if you go anywhere else, people will say, oh, I've heard of you. I read your blog. Hey, can you come and help us on this project here, please? And that's what I find happens to me. And I'm very intensively booked. So it's working pretty well for me right now. And I would like to help anyone in this room to stretch your wings, become a better tester, become known, and that's the Buccaneering way. So thank you very much. And I'm going to be hanging out today at the booth. I'm ready to be argued with about any of these subjects. I'm ready to talk to anybody, and I hope you will talk to me. Thank you very much.